So where we left off last time was I was putting a thin layer of clay around the chest and back of my figure. Again, I reused the clay from the leg, so you should have at that point finished the leg, photographed it, and please don't mash up the leg until you photograph it and submit it, but you should have used the upper part of the leg, the thigh, to cover up the chest. And again, it should cover almost all of the chest, probably about 2/3. You want to think it should end pretty much where like the belly button would end. All right. On the back, I use the lower leg, the calves and the foot. Little less clay means a little less coverage, but this should probably get down beneath what you would consider your rib cage and your lungs in real life. So we got a little more area to cover on the back. We got some area to cover on the front. And what I'm going to be using for that is, again, I'm going to recycle the arm that we made. Now, again, make sure it's off the dowel if you didn't already take it. I will break this thing up in two parts. We got the hand and the forearm, and then we got the upper arm and the shoulder. Obviously, in this case, since I have more to cover on the back, sort of going into the lower back and the buttocks, I'm going to use my upper arm to do that part. So, again, before we start in sort of mashing this thing down into a thin layer, very important that we first mash it into a nice meatball. We want to make sure that everything's packed in tightly. Because again, in any building with any type of clay, if you have cracks, if you have folds and creases, those are the areas most likely to chip off and break later on. That's true if you're using water-based clay, that's true if you're using oil-based clay, and it's true if you're using this polymer plastic-based clay. So, generally what we want to do is make sure that we have a nice, smooth, put-together surface, especially since I'm blending several pieces together. It's all been wedged up back into a meatball. And then again, just like before, we are going to start flattening out. Now, how big do we need to flatten this out? I'm going to flip my guy over to the backside. We want to make sure that we have enough to really cover from wherever we stopped off and have enough that's going to be able to sort of fill in underneath on the character too. So we don't want to have an empty area on the bottom. So you want to keep on flattening this thing. We don't want to stretch it out forever and ever, because once we have it long enough, and I think I need to make mine a little bit longer, once we have it long enough, we're just going to go ahead and try to make it a little bit wider. So again, it wraps all the way around. I'm going to keep kind of working the clay here a little bit. I'll take a look that I have the coverage over here. What I'm looking for is that some of this clay is long enough to kind of make it around that corner. I'm going to continue to flatten it. Again, as important as flattening it is trying to keep it even, that we don't have one part that's really, really lumpy and thick and another part that's super thin. Maybe about the thickness of 2/4 is what we're looking for. You can always press it into a piece of paper if you need to, or a surface like your desk. And when I look at this, I see I've got enough clay now to kind of reach the back. And again, I'm working on the back. Remember, the back was a little shorter than the front. One of the ways we could tell that one's part of the other. Okay. I could see that that'll cover up there, and then I have enough extra clay to kind of close around the bottom part of the hips over here. And what I'm going to do is carefully, I'm going to finish thinning this out, and then I'm going to mold it around the body. And this shouldn't be a very dramatically difficult and or challenging part for you. The most important thing is that we kind of get a uniform thickness of the whole thing. And again, I am molding it around the foil that I already have. Got a flap going over here, just like with the shoulders that I did earlier. You might have a little bit of foil that's peeking out right where the thigh meets the hips. Totally fine, because we're going to have to make those little muscle connectors later on that are going to kind of fill all that in. I want to see that I get at least some coverage wrapping around to the front side over here. All right, and you can see some of the clay on my bottom is long enough to really kind of close that out, come all the way around to the front. Okay, so that's what we want to do. I got a little bit of an opening over here. I'll use a little clay later on to kind of close things up. I'm going to take my hand and my forearm, Again, pack them in nice and tight. Make yourself your little meatball. Get rid of any sort of imperfections. And we're going to go ahead and start flattening. And again, what we're looking for this time is that we get full coverage on the front, and it's thick enough and wide enough to kind of wrap and cover up most of the foil. Now, maybe you'll have some empty spots. That's totally possible. You'll see when I'm done with mine, I'll have a couple empty spots. But what you want is you want to try to get as much coverage as possible. So again, try to keep the thickness of this clay relatively even, but we really want to kind of flatten it out like we would a pizza pie or any sort of dough that we would make something like that. And I want to kind of look that it's long enough to kind of cover from where I ended off in the beginning, get around to attaching through the bottom, and then have enough material that it kind of can close here as close as we can without sort of making the clay thin enough that the foil just peeks through. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and start blending and mushing that into my foil. I'm going to try to get some of this to overlap here, and the most important part is blending that edge together. Now, if you made it thin enough like me where it kind of breaks apart a little bit, let's see like what's happening over here. What I'll tell you is we'll add a little bit more clay to that in a second. Let me attach the sort of hips to my torso, at least the start of my torso right now. Blend it off the bottom, and at this point, if you have like a little bit of foil sticking out here, totally okay, don't worry about that. If you have some foil openings here on, like, let's say the rib cage, like right here and right here, do the best to press that clay in, and if you need to, take another little wedge of clay, just like a fingertip's worth. Alright, get that into your fingers, roll it up, even if it's small, roll it up into a little ball, a little meatball, start flattening it, and just make yourself a little bit of a patch. Same thickness of everything to get in there and sort of patch up areas that might have not gotten all the coverage that we needed. And again, once you get that patch in there, let's just smooth that out. So it's okay if you could still see the foil up around the neck, up around the start of the arms and legs, that's okay. But for the midsection, all the torso, the stomach, what'll be the hips and everything else like that, we really want to find a way to work and get decent coverage. And as you make these patches, if you need to make them, again, make sure that you blend them in. You want to be able to look at this thing later on and not even really see the patch. Take my little pinch of clay, mush it together, roll it into my little tiny ball, start flattening it, make myself a little patch. Not quite the coverage I would hope right there. I'm going to cover that up, work that into it. Again, the blending here is an important part. If you do decide that you like yours and we're going to bake it later on and make it into a hard plastic sort of figure, you want to make sure that these little things that are connector pieces are all well sort of welded into one another. I've got that. I'm going to do a little bit more work here on smoothing that out. And what I'm going to do is I got one more little spot on the other side. I'll just do that and kind of finish up for the day. Just a little pinch of clay, nothing crazy. Just like a fingertip's worth. Mush it together. Make yourself your meatball. Start flattening it out. Make sure it's big enough to kind of cover the area you need to cover. And then just work it in there. So what you see right now is part 2 of starting the chest. This is now adding the hips. And this is all stuff that's going to be just the base of that part of the body, because we are going to add some musculature to this later on. We're going to start building our arms soon, and we're going to work our way through this. So there we go. Here is our chest. You can see I've got pretty much good coverage here. Okay, if you see the foil here, here, and down here, but underneath, wrapped around, it is covered. Back is covered, sides are covered, and we are moving along on our new little clay man or woman. Alright guys, hopefully those of you following along with me, that we're doing okay and you guys are alright. And if you have any questions, please ask.